Hello, everybody around the world. Once again, it is I, Abbish Rand, filling in for Salitvak, the accidental Talmudist. And I am really excited to be here today. I'm really excited about today's class. We are going to be covering a bunch of topics and then tying them all together. It's going to be like the various domains of the Shabbos. So we're going to be doing entering various domains, and then making an Eruvin out of them. Eruvin literally means to like mix together. So we're going to like pull them all together and tie it all in one big lechi. No, anyway, it's going to be really exciting, and I can't wait to share it all with you. We are going to answer some questions first, and then we're going to really get right into it. And to start, we are going to say welcome to Yehudit Sobel from Florence, South Carolina. I'm glad that the pictures helped for you yesterday. I saw that they really helped your understanding. And Leona Sue Thacker from sunny Southern Illinois. And Paula Schmidt-Klauser from Chicago. Melissa Utel-Urin from Great Neck. We are really excited to have you all here joining us. Shabbat Shalom to you all. Bill Eldridge, it's good to see you again, calling in from Arkansas. And Chuck Walker, Shalom to you as well in South Florida. Noor Ali in Pakistan, that's really exciting. Alan Hain from Columbia, Maryland. Thank you all of you for joining us today. You are going to be in for a real treat. So, now that we usher in the stillness, we will now bring some light into the world and spread it. Okay, so I do want to address, to start off, so we're not left with any loose threads. That would not be good for the Eruv if the threads were down, but that's a joke that you'll get in time. First question. There was a question yesterday posted by, let me just pull that up, by Maggie Lynn Scott, asking about the handbreadth that we're talking about. When we talk about a handbreadth, whose handbreadth? Does it depend on the person doing the measurements? The answer to that is no. These measurements were standardized, and although there is some disagreement in exactly what that comes out to in modern measurements, but they were standardized, and a handbreadth comes out to in modern measurements to approximately 4 or 4.5 inches. I'd have to check that up, but it is a standard measurement, so it does not matter who is doing the measuring. I actually have, and these are available, a measuring tape that has, along with the inches or centimeters, it has the handbreadths and cubits. So that's actually really cool. Okay, that is as far as that is concerned. Now I want to address a question that we left off with yesterday, which I'm really excited to share with you that I found the answer. Obviously, there's going to be someone who talks about it if it's such an obvious question. We said yesterday that it was strange that the Gemara brought over here in Eiruvin, the end of the discussion of the first Mishnah on page 11b, the Talmud brings a interesting back and forth where Rav Ashi met the students of Rav Ashi and asked them, did your master, did your Rebbe teach you anything about this doorway, the tzuras hapesach, anything about its requirements? So their answer was, he didn't say anything, but that's not exactly accurate what they were answering. So actually, there's a Tosfos. Now, Tosfos is one of the commentaries on the page of the Talmud, but it's also not on the page. So similar, I'm going to give you a little bit of historical background. Rashi is the primary commentary on the Talmud. The generation or 2 generations after him were the Tosafos. Now the Tosafos, some of them were amongst them were Rashi's grandchildren, but there were many others as well, and they put together. The body of work that we attribute to them is called Tosfos, but it's not really one body of work. It's many collected writings. Some of those collected writings made it into the Talmud on the outside part of the page. Some of them did not. So many of the early commentators actually quote a Tosfos, which is not on the page, and it did not make it into the standardized edition of the Talmud, but it is to be found in something called the Tosfos Rabbeinu Peretz, the collection of Tosafist writings collected by Rabbi Peretz, and in there he addresses our question and changes really the understanding of what's going on over here beyond the simple reading. And basically what Tosfos suggests or reads the explanation of the words is that they were asking the students of Rav Ashi this that we just mentioned. We just listed several rules about doorways. One of them being that it needs to have a hinge. One of them being that it has to be strong enough to support an actual door. So those rulings that were mentioned, they just like came out of nowhere. They just like were listed in the Gemara with no explanation. So did your Rebbe, Rav Ashi, now it makes sense, as someone pointed out yesterday, why would be asking, being that Rav Ashi was the one who standardized the Talmud, it makes sense that we'd be wanting to get on the same page. So did Rabbi Ashi, did he say anything on that matter? Did he give a ruling? Do we follow that? Do we actually need a hinge? Do we actually need it to be strong enough to hold the door? So that was really what the question was. These rulings about doorways, are they actual legal fact, or were they just thrown out there and we don't actually follow them? So Tosfos learns that what the students were answering was, no, he didn't say anything about it. Meaning, he didn't say that those were actually practical legalities, and therefore they don't apply. It does not need to have a hinge. It does not need to be strong enough, and that was what they were answering. Lo amar klum. He did not say anything. Meaning, he did not address that. He did not address that in a positive sense that it's necessary. Other of the early commentators, known as the Rishonim, say actually because Rav Ashi did not address it, so we're left with a question, and therefore we have to be stringent in those matters. That is another side of this equation, but it is quite interesting when you look at it that way, and you look at the text, and you realize that it's saying something totally different than what you might have imagined originally. So I'm glad to be able to share that with you today. Now, okay, so I'm going to start weaving the tale that we are going to tell today throughout today's class. It's going to bring in a bunch of disparate topics, but before I do that, some housekeeping. My son, Meli, Tzvi Melech, is going to be 10 years old this month, actually this coming Monday, and I wanted to shout out and wish him a happy birthday. I am really excited to be joining him on this next level of life. So Mazel Tov Meli. Now, that being said, I am going to start off with a piece of Torah, a commentary, if you will, so for those of you who don't know, we read a portion of the Torah. We split it up amongst the weeks of the year, and once a year we finish the complete Torah in the synagogue on Shabbos in the morning. We do a reading. Now, last week's reading was known as Parshas Re'eh. It's in the volume of Deuteronomy, and there's a very interesting verse in the beginning, and it's, I think, Deuteronomy 11, and the verse, which I will pull up right now. Yes, Deuteronomy 11:30. The verse says, and I will read it properly. Now, what are we talking about over here? we're talking about the verses surrounding this are talking about the curses and blessings that the Jewish nation, that the tribe of Israel, the nation of Israel, when they come out of the desert into the land of Israel, they will be faced with certain blessings and curses. And there's going to be this big event, which is described later on, where they come into the land of Israel and they're separated. Half of the nation is standing on one mountain, half of the nation standing on the other mountain, and then the priest tribe will be in the middle, dishing out curses and blessings. So now where is this going to take place? So that's the verse I was just reading. The Torah very explicitly spends, now mind you, just to backtrack, there's no extra words in the Torah. Everything is learned from, everything is we delve into and we figure out what each extra letter means. So here we have a verse in the Torah which spends, I think, 17 words describing exactly where this once in an ever event, which basically the verse says, well, where's this mountain Gerizim, this mountain and Har Ebal, these two mountains, where are they located? So they're located on the other side of the Jordan River, after the path of the setting sun, in the land of the Canaanites, who dwell in the valley opposite Gilgal, next to Elonei Moreh. So the verse goes very explicit detail into describing where this is taking place. Now, that wouldn't be so interesting or so problematic, aside from what I just mentioned about the extra words, except for the fact that the rest of this Torah portion, throughout this Torah portion, it refers to another place. That place is the eventual place of the Jewish temple, of the Holy Temple, and the Beit HaMikdash. Now, that temple is not referred to, its place is not referred to anywhere in the 5 books of Moses, and all it says, in particular in this Torah reading, all it says is El Hamakom, to the place which I will rest my spirit on it, to the place, over and over again. El Hamakom, I think I made the counting correctly. Just like this verse describing where this one-time event is taking place has 17 words, I think that there's 17 references to the place where the eventual temple will be, yet it does not describe where it's going to be. Now, that's a bomb question, if you will, that really should make all of you, hey, what's up with that? So it bothered me, and someone had raised this question with me years ago. And it was a while till I was actually in a class in Jerusalem by the late Rabbi Mordechai Druk, who was a Maggid, if you will, a tale teller. He went around giving speeches and encouraging people. And he spoke throughout Jerusalem. He spoke in various locations throughout the week. And I used to go listen to him. And he spoke about this specific question, and he gave a fascinating answer, which is going to illuminate really the rest of what we're going to be talking about today. Now, what he said was like this: blessing and cursing, this one-time event, was literally a one-time event, and it's a direct channel from God. There's a pipeline, and it's going to be coming from God to us. And that was the location of where that pipeline was opening up. That's why that can be defined. But a place of holiness, a place where God is talking about resting His spirit, resting His name, where He's going to rest, as if His presence, if you will. That is something that is not defined in geographical terms. Why? Because in particular in Judaism, we believe that we can create a space. We have the power to bring God into our lives wherever we are. Every place has holiness or potential holiness. And it's just a question of focusing ourselves, making that place a place that God feels welcome. That is what creates the holiness in the place, or that's what welcomes God into the place. So that's why the Torah does not delineate the exacting place where that holiness can enter, because there isn't an exacting place. If the Torah would define it, that would limit us. We're not supposed to be limited in that respect. We have the power to spread that holiness, or to bring that holiness, to focus that holiness wherever we are. So that's why it can't be delineated, because that would take away that power from us. Now, using this concept, we can understand a bunch of things. And we're going to get into those, in particular our tractate that we're dealing with right now. But there are several things that can be defined by this. One is Rosh Hashanah, as Sal mentioned earlier in his live event just before the class started, that today is the first day of the month of Elul, which we start blowing the shofar as a call to repentance, and giving us a heads up that, in a month from now is going to be the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. I mentioned a couple of days ago that we blow the shofar for this whole month. Then the day before Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, we stop. No blowing. Then the next day, Rosh Hashanah, we blow the shofar 100 times. And it's a highlight, main focus of the prayers. Now, why is that? So one of the reasons given is that we want to confuse Satan. We want to confuse the Satan that by what's going on. We're blowing, we're not blowing, then we are blowing. And the long-standing question is, what do you mean confusing Satan? He's been around for a really long time, and he's seen this happen over and over again. So, especially if he's in the timeline, right? So, what does that mean, confusing him? He knows what's going to happen. We're going to stop. We're going to blow for a month, stop for a day, and then blow. So, I'm going to leave that question hanging for a moment. We're going to get back to it and address it using the principles that we just discussed. But before that, we're going to mention a couple more things. One is, on a personal note, and then we'll get into our tractate. I grew up in Canada. Some of you may have seen my bio, in Toronto. My parents have been living at the same address for the past 40 years about. And the house that I grew up in was just sold today. So my siblings are all in various states of feelings about this event. And I was thinking that it really, when I heard that this morning, I felt that really tied into today's class. Because is that something to be upset about? Like, what does that mean? To bring up Harry Potter, he had to go back to the home that he grew up in to recharge. There was something about that space, the love ensconced in that place that recharged him. So that's a power installed in that space. And I've always felt that way about certain homes, my home, other places where I may have gained something. And so what does that mean? What does that mean for our home of 40 years, my parents' home of 40 years, to be just like that, sold, it's no longer theirs? That as well goes into this concept, and we'll revisit that in a few minutes. But I really feel that all these pieces that are coming together today are really part of the bigger discussion that we're having right now. And what is that? So we're talking about Eiruvin. What is Eiruvin? Eiruvin is the combining of domains to enable them to be used in a specific way, in a more family-friendly way, in a more open way, if you will. Now, what does that mean? So till now, the first 10 pages of our tractate, we've been discussing various ways of hechsher mavoy, of fixing, of completing the alleyway, whether it's putting doorways, whether it's putting side posts or cross beams, the various rulings about open space inside, too much open space, to having enough standing space. How do you close up spaces, whether it's a yard, whether it's an alley, and lots of technical details in how to enclose this space or at least create the impression of an enclosure. Up until, even yesterday when we talked about the vines, hanging the vines across the posts, which is how many Eiruvin today work, that there's a wire spread across posts, and that's what creates this delineation. Now, this is somewhat of a hard concept to swallow, how these wires and beams create a separate space. But we need to go back a step and understand where that's coming from, because understanding that there's all these technicalities and then seeing them applied in a modern day Eruv, such as here in the city of Los Angeles, where it's a massive Eruv, I think it's the biggest one in the world, and using retaining walls of the freeway system as the side walls. The leap going from what the Talmud is talking about to what we are practicing here in Los Angeles and other places in the world is definitely a leap, but it takes some understanding of how we get to there, especially because the side 2 of today's page of 12b talks about an individual. It talks about Rabbi Yehuda mentions someone who has two homes on either side of a public domain. So he has his two homes, but he wants to be able to pass things from one side to the other. And Rabbi Yehuda says all he has to do is put a side post at the side of one side of each side of the street. So attached to the house on one side, attached to the house on the other side, there has to be a side post, and then you can carry in the middle of that. And there's a discussion about that. How is that enough for a public domain? We have not seen that until now. The possibility of using just a side post to take away from the status of a public domain. Without getting into the details of that right now, it's obvious that there's a huge leap from there to a massive, massive Los Angeles city Eruv. And that's what I want to talk about. Because the step back that we have to take is that you can turn, if you will, to page 21b, and over there, the Talmud brings that this whole concept of Eruv, this whole idea of being able to demarcate your private space and attach it to another one, and therefore be able to transfer items from one to the other, goes way back, all the way to King Solomon. Now, King Solomon was the one who introduced this concept of combining domains. Why did he do that? So Rashi points out on page 21b that originally, people were able to carry freely, as long as they weren't going into a public domain. Meaning, from a biblical standpoint, and that's what the ruling followed up until King Solomon, was that you cannot carry from a public domain to a private domain and vice versa. That was the only place where there was a problem. Being as we've seen so far, that this is the reality, that most properties, most domains are not public. It takes a lot of criterion to be considered a public domain. 16 cubits wide, no covering, no roofing, and possibly 600,000 people traversing that road every single day, or alternatively, the ability for 600,000 people to traverse that road every day. So there are not that many roads that would fall into that category. Therefore, up until King Solomon, there was no problem passing something to your neighbor's backyard from yours. King Solomon felt, especially the way it seems that properties were situated in those days, that being that two people who shared, their yards were next to each other, then there was a common courtyard in front of the two homes that they both shared. So, and then those courtyards led into alleys that were shared by more courtyards. He felt that that was too similar, being that you had this absolutely private domain, and then these shared courtyards or shared alleys, which multiple people were sharing. He felt that was too, him and his Beit Din, his court of law that he presided over, felt that there was too much similarity between that and a actual public domain, from carrying transferring something from a absolutely private domain to a absolutely public domain. Being that the absolutes can be defined as from a property used by one person to a property used by multiple people, he felt that the similarity from that to private domain to a property used by multiple people, which wasn't a public domain, was too similar, and therefore people would forget that distinction, and they said no more transferring even from one private domain to another private domain. But, and this is a big important piece over here, because some people say, hey, how are you getting around these laws of carrying and transferring from one domain to another domain with these wires? Like, you're using these, heebie-jeebies, you're using these, imagined walls to protect your space or to enclose your space. The truth is, it's not. That's not how it works. Because the premise is, this was always okay. King Solomon said, hey, this is too similar. We don't want people confusing the boundaries between private and public, and therefore we are going to institute these laws of transferring from any domain to any other domain, but with one qualification. We are going to create a system for how they can still transfer from one domain to another domain within these parameters, and that is by creating these lechis and kores, these side posts and crossbeams and wires and all these different laws, the technicalities that we've been getting into, is all as a to create that space so that we realize that it's a created space. Now, going back to what we started with, a created space means that we have the ability, as defined by King Solomon and the Talmud, to really, similar to what we're saying in as far as bringing the holiness into our place, that we are creating this space. It has to do with our intention, what we put up, how we close off that space, but our intentions can create this space to be a different sort of domain than it perhaps was previously. And that creates a shared space, a space that we can enjoy the Sabbath, enjoy the Shabbos. More people, older people can go to synagogue with their walkers and crutches or canes. Babies can be brought by their parents. People can visit each other. And all within this context of Shabbos observance, of Sabbath observance, and the way the message that really King Solomon was giving is that we are creating our space. Similarly to the Torah teaching that by not defining where holiness can be, we realize that we are the arbiters of that. We can bring the holiness into our space. So extending that thought to a couple other areas, the child at home. That space does have a power. Perhaps it can be transferred. Perhaps some of it is always going to be left there. But we have that power over our space, and that's why it's so meaningful to us, because we literally transform that space by the energies and thoughts that we put into it, actions too. So I was just thinking before that it's a you can quote me on this, but It really just says it all. Your space does not define you. You define your space. You even define your reality by the thoughts and energies that you put into it, the actions that you put into it. And how do we tie this into Rosh Hashanah, to the blowing of the shofar? So I think it's really obvious. There are many answers given to the original question and how we're confusing Satan and what is this blowing and not blowing and yes blowing. But the bottom line is, we are creating realities. When we blow that shofar, when we send that message into our souls, the wake-up call, repent, get close to God. So aside for creating the space inside ourselves by blowing that shofar, we also creating realities in the universe. And when we take a pause the day before Rosh Hashanah, and we gather ourselves, and then we come back the next day and blow it like we've never blown before, creating stupendous realities. We're not going to get into all the Kabbalistic realities of this, but suffice it to say, there's a lot to be said about that. And when Satan hears that shofar being blown from a fresh standpoint, where we took that break to remember that we are creating these realities and then blowing it and storming the heavens, that is the biggest statement of our connection to God that we can make, which blows Satan away every single time. The realities that we create just blow him away. And that is what it means by we're confusing him. So my message to everybody is really this concept, really this idea of being able to create our realities. And before I sign off, I want to just share really two things about today's page in the Talmud. I don't want to skip the second Mishnah of Eruvin, but I don't want to also distract from our point. Suffice it to say that the Mishnah is bringing in yet another discussion of how to differentiate between a mavoi, from the borderline between a mavoi and ali and the public domain. What needs to be put to separate that? Argument of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, whether a side post is enough or a crossbeam. And that's Beis Hillel, and Beis Shammai says that no, you need actually both. So at least you need both. At least when the opening is between 4 cubits and 10 cubits. But what I wanted to focus on from today's page is a discussion on 12b, which ties very much into what we've been discussing right now, which is the Talmud asks, when we talk about the crossbeam and the side post, what is the purpose of this crossbeam and side post? Are they existing as a hypothetical or as a wall? They replace the realities of a full wall, or is it just as a wake up call? Is it just as hey, there's a differentiation happening over here? So the Talmud basically establishes that a crossbeam, the crossbeam that we discussed, how high it's allowed to be, and really the whole discussion of how high it's allowed to be goes into this boils down to this point. What is the purpose of the crossbeam? And the purpose, as the Talmud establishes, is a reminder. It's a heker. It's a take notice, and that's why if it was too high, we wouldn't notice it. And that is where crossbeams come into play. A side post, on the other hand, is a very different reality. The Talmud establishes that a side post creates an invisible wall, if you will. It creates the effect of a wall, even though it's just yay big. So that is the difference between side posts and crossbeams. But the bottom line of these different delineations is that as King Solomon instituted, they are there to remind us of our ability to transform that space, or the fact that we did transform that space, which going back to the Los Angeles Eruv, is why there are rabbis who are not so okay with making an Eruv, with enclosing a space that is so big, that is so huge as a city. Not just Los Angeles, because you are somewhat losing out on that reminder. The people who live there, people perhaps never lived in a space that did not have one, perhaps are going to forget those demarcations or the necessity for those demarcations. But that is an important part of understanding Eruv and being able to use one, is understanding that it's not, we're allowed to, combine spaces, we're allowed to do whatever we want. It's because we transformed it with our actions. We transformed that space. And as we come into this preparation month, preparation for the Judgment Day, the annual Judgment Day, my blessing to all of you out there is take this message, take this realization of this ability that we have to transform our space, that we have to bring holiness into our space, that we have to make our realities a reality. Take that energy and use it to transform ourselves and our reality for the better, and to be blessed with a Shana Tova Umituka, a good and sweet new year. Have a wonderful, wonderful day and an awesome new year. Oh, questions. Sorry about that, everybody. Let's see what we have to deal with over here. Okay, we have one question from Buckthorn Studios. I have experienced this place of home turnover in my life several times. It is indeed an opportunity to redefine the sense of personal domain of body and soul. I agree with that 100%. As I encounter this transition, I haven't lived in that home for many years. It's still though my home, and I will take your thoughts with me as I think about what this means to me. Selasa Nilever asks, what is the difference between physical and spiritual circumcision? I don't think that that's what we were talking about over here. I don't have a good way to address that off the cuff. Bill Eldred says, this is actually, one second, I have to scroll up. Yeah, much as I'm fascinated by the nature of an Eruv as a history buff, it just feels so much like a walled city at a certain point. And just carrying through a walled city doesn't feel really Shabbistic, I guess. Okay. I mean, I'm not sure why, I can't question your feeling, but for example, in the old city of Jerusalem, there's absolutely no problem. Everyone agrees you can carry there on Shabbos because it is literally a walled city. It is not being traversed by just anyone. It is enclosed. So actually, if it was a walled city, that would be totally fine from every standpoint. I'm sorry. I really left something out of today's class. I don't want this to be a distraction. But I do encourage everybody, I will give you the brief details, but I do encourage everybody to look up the Toronto Eruv. The website, I will just check it over here. The website is Toronto Eruv, TORONTOERUV.org. Check it out, where it talks about the history of the Toronto Eruv. I think it is a fascinating story. I grew up there. This happened in my lifetime while I was there. It changed my life, I guess. And it's a fascinating story how they realized that there were train literally over the entire area where Jews live, where religious Jews live, at least in Toronto, which is a large area, is surrounded by train tracks, and creating an almost natural boundary, making Toronto almost into a walled city, except for one detail. There were no fences around the train tracks. Someone had the realization, as they were researching, creating this Eruv, that legally there has to be a wall or a 10-foot high fence around train tracks. And they basically got the train company to enforced the law and build it of their own expense, rather than the Jewish community being saddled with this hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of expense to build barriers around the whole city. They had the two train companies build it out of their own pocket, and basically creating most of what was needed to have natural, almost walls surrounding the entire city. It's a fascinating story, including the fact that the liaison with the train company, who made sure that this was all taken care of, shockingly passed away literally right after his role in making sure that that was taken place happened. There's other things that go into this story. He had dreams before the rabbis came to him. He had his father came to him in a dream telling him to help out. Crazy, crazy stuff. Check it out, torontoeruv.org. But all of this leads back to this point that we're talking about over here, which is that we change our reality, and there's things going on that we don't even realize on the spiritual realm, that just by being involved in this, we make a difference. And therefore, take that lesson into your personal